Hello guys, and welcome to Gas City Gaming's Warhammer 40k lore video series. In the first few videos of this series, we'll be taking a look at the prehistory of the Warhammer 40k universe. Going forward though, if you'd like to me to make videos about certain topics, please mention them in the comment below, as I want to make videos about what you guys want to hear about, getting further into the lore so we can all learn a little bit more about the game and the universe we love. Enough intro for today, let's get started. The birth of the Star Gods. The birth of the entities known as the Star Gods occurred at the same time as the moment of creation itself, as they formed from the vast insensate energies first unleashed by that churning mass of cataclysmic force. And that anarchic interweaving of matter and energy, the sea of stars began to swirl into existence, and for an eon the universe was nothing more than hot hydrogen gas and the light elemental dust ruled over by the gravitic force of billions of newborn suns. Long before the first planets had formed and cooled, the very first truly self-aware beings emerged, their thoughts encased within the lines of force produced by the plasma and electromagnetic flares of the stars themselves. In later times, these entities would become known as the Catan, but early in their existence, they were nothing like the malevolent beings they would eventually become. They were little more than monstrous energy parasites that suckled upon the solar energies of the stars that had brought them into existence, shortening the lives of otherwise main-sequence stars by millions of standard years. In time, these star vampires learned to move on the diaphanous wings of the universe's electromagnetic flux, leaving their birthplaces to drift through the cosmic ether to new stellar feeding grounds, and began their cycle of stellar destruction once more. Beings of pure energy, they paid no mind to the hunks of solid matter they passed in the vacuum of space. The blazing geothermal fires and weak geomagnetic fields of these nascent planets, insufficient to be worth feeding even their ravenous hunger. The Old Ones. Just as the stars gave birth to their children, so the planets of the newborn galaxy eventually gave birth to life forms composed of matter, which began the long evolutionary climb to self-awareness. The first sentient beings of the Milky Way galaxy known to have developed a civilization technologically advanced enough to cross the stars was a reptilian race of beings called the Old Ones by the Eldar, who knew them best. They possessed a slow, cold-blooded, but still deep wisdom, having long studied the stars and raised astronomy and physics to such a level that their science and technology appeared to humanity like an arcane art. Their understanding of the workings of the universe were such that they could manipulate alternate dimensions and undertake great works of psychic engineering. Their science allowed them to cross the vast gulfs of space with only a single step through the myriad warp gates they built to connect the worlds of the galaxy in a vast network, much like the Eldar webway of today, though on a much larger scale. The Old Ones spread their spawn to many places in the galaxy, but they also knew that all life was precious. Where they passed, they seeded new intelligent species and reshaped thousands of worlds to make them their own, according to their predetermined environmental and geographic criteria. It is believed by some in the Adeptus Mechanicus that even Terra felt the Old One's touch, long before humanity's rise to self-awareness, though this notion is considered heretical at best by the ecclesiarchy, as the Imperial Creed teaches that mankind was made in the image of the God Emperor before his spirit was incarnated in physical flesh millennia ago. The Old Ones' civilization reached its height in excess of 60 million years ago. The Old Ones were responsible for the creation or genetic advancement of most of the currently active intelligent species of the galaxy, including the Eldar, the Krork, the Orcs' precursors, the Slan, and the Jokero, though it is unknown if they played any role in the evolution of humanity. The Old Ones were potent psychics who routinely used the powers of the warp for a wide variety of technological applications. The Old Ones constructed a system of instantaneous, faster-than-light portals through warp space that were ultimately adapted to create the Eldar's webway, and was its more advanced precursor. These portals connected all of the Old Ones' colony worlds across vast swaths of interstellar space. The Necron-Tyr and the Wars of Secession. The humanoid species that would become the Necrons began their existence under a fearsome, scourging star in the far reaches of the galaxy known as the Halo Stars region, billions of standard years before mankind evolved on Terra. Assailed at every moment by ionizing solar winds and intense radiation storms, the flesh and blood Necron-Tyr became a morbid people whose precarious lifespans were riven by constant loss. What little information the Imperium of Man has recovered on the Necrontyr tells their lives were short and uncertain, their bodies blighted and consumed at an early age by the terrible cancers and other illnesses linked to the high levels of ionizing radiation given off by their sun. Necrontyr cities were built in anticipation of their inhabitants' early demise, as the living were only brief residents living in the shadows of the vast sepulchres and tombs of their ancestors. Likewise, the ruling dynasties were founded on the anticipation of demise, and the living were thought of as no more than temporary residents hurrying through the more permanent and lasting structures raised in honor of the dead. On the Necrontyr homeworld, the greatest monuments were always built for the dead, never the living. Driven by necessity, the Necrontyr escaped their crucible prison and struck out for the stars, hopeful of carving an empire in which they could realize their species' potential, free from the lethal energies of their birth star. Unable to find peace on their own world, the Necrontyr blindly groped outward into the universe to explore other stars, using stasis crypts and slow-moving antimatter-powered torch ships that were clad in the living metal known as necrodermis. To resist the millennia-long journeys through the void, the Necrontyr began to colonize distant worlds. Little by little, the Necrontyr dynasties spread ever further, until much of the ancient galaxy answered to their rule. From the earliest days, the rulers of individual Necrontyr dynasties were themselves governed by the Triarch, a council composed of 3 pharaons. The head of the Triarch was known as the Silent King, for he addressed his subjects only through the other 2 pharaons, who ruled alongside him. Nominally a hereditary position, the uncertain lifespans of the Necrontyr ensured that the title of Silent King nonetheless passed from one royal dynasty to another many times. The final days of the Necrontyr Empire occurred in the reign of Zarek, the last of the Silent Kings. Sometime during their slow expansion, the Necrontyr encountered an ancient species far older than any other in existence in the known galaxy. Collectively, these beings were known as the Old Ones, and they were absolute masters of forms of energy the Necrontyr could not even conceive of, yet alone wield. The Old Ones had long ago conquered the secrets of immortality, yet they refused to share the gift of eternal life with the Necrontyr, who yet bore the curse of the bitter star they had been born under. The colonization of much of the galaxy by the reptilian mystics had been immeasurably swifter and more expansive than that of the Necrontyr because of their warp gates and mastery of the immaterium. That, and the Old Ones' incredibly long, if not downright immortal, lifespans, kindled a burning, jealous rage in the Necrontyr, which ate at their culture spiritually as much as their physical cancers consumed their bodies. The Necrontyr were astonished to learn that another intelligent species enjoyed such long lives while their own were cut so brutally short. But as time wore on, further strife came to the Necrontyr. Each dynasty of the Necrontyr sought to claim its own destiny, and soon the great houses were engaged in all-out conflicts, known as the Wars of Secession. Had circumstances remained as they were, for but a generation more, it is possible that the Necrontyr would have wiped themselves out, as so many species had before them and shall do in the future. As their territory grew ever wider and more diverse, the unity that had made them strong was eroded, and bitter wars were waged as entire realms fought to win independence. Ultimately, the Triarch, the ruling council of the Necrontyr Empire, realized that the only hope of unity lay in conflict with an external enemy. But there were few who could prove a credible threat. Only the Old Ones, the first of all the galaxy's known sentient species, were a prospective foe powerful enough to bind the feuding Necrontyr dynasties to a common cause. Such a war was simplicity itself to justify, for the Necrontyr had ever rankled at the Old Ones' refusal to share the secrets of eternal life. So did the Triarch declare war on the Old Ones. At the same time, they offered amnesty to any secessionist dynasties who willingly returned to the fold. Thus lured by the spoils of victory and the promise of immortality, the separatist Necrontyr realms abandoned their wars of secession, and the war in heaven began. It was the last of the Silent Kings who headed the Triarch of the Necrontyr Empire, Zarek, who formulated the plan that would change everything forever and have consequences that would echo throughout history for countless millions of years. In a typically bitter act of jealousy and resentment for the Necrontyr race, it was the Silent King who used the Old One's refusal to share the secret of immortality as a pretext for war, forcibly uniting the Necrontyr species beneath the rule of the Triarch against their common foe. War erupted across the stars, yet while the Silent King succeeded in uniting his hateful people, it was a war the Necrontyr could not win, not on their own. The War in Heaven. The terrible wars between the Old Ones and the Necrontyr that followed, known later in Eldar myth as the War in Heaven, would fill a library in their own right, but the Necrontyr could never win. Their superior technology was consistently outmaneuvered by the Old Ones thanks to their mastery of the webway, portals, and warp gates. The Necrontyr were pushed back until they were little more than an irritation to the Old Ones' dominance of the galaxy. A acquiescent threat clinging to their irradiated world among the halo stars, exiled and forgotten. The Necrontyr's fury was cooled by their long millennia of imprisonment on their homeworld, slowly transforming into an utter hatred towards all other forms of intelligent life and an implacable determination to avenge themselves upon their seemingly invincible enemies. But in the face of defeat, the always fragile unity of the Necrontyr began to fracture once more. No longer did the prospect of a common enemy have any hold over the disparate dynasties. Scores of generations had now lived and died in the service of an unwinnable war, and many Necrontyr dynasties would have gladly sued for peace with the Old Ones if the ruling Triarch had permitted it. Thus began the second iteration of the Wars of Secession, more widespread and ruinous than any that had come before. So fractured had the Necrontyr dynasties become by then that, had the Old Ones been so inclined, they could have wiped out their foes with ease. Faced with the total collapse of their rule, the Triarchs searched desperately for a means of restoring order. In this, their prayers were answered, though the price for their species would be incalculably high. It was during the reign of the Silent King Zarek that the godlike energy beings known as the Catan first blighted the Necrontyr. It is impossible to say for certain how the Necrontyr first made contact with the Catan, though many misleading, contradictory, and one-sided accounts of these events exist. The dusty archives of the Tomb World of Solemnus claim it was but an accident, a chance discovery made by a stellar probe during the investigation of a dying star. The Book of Mournful Night, held under close guard in the Black Library's innermost sanctum, tells rather that the raw hatred that the Necrontyr held as a race for the Old Ones sang out across space, acting as a beacon that the Catan could not ignore. Another account claims that from the earliest days of their civilization, Necrontyr scientists had been deeply engaged in stellar studies to try to understand and protect themselves from their own sun's baleful energies. After long, bitter centuries of searching, and for some power to unleash upon the Old Ones, the Necrontyr researchers used stellar probes to discover unusual electrodynamic anomalies in the oldest, dying stars of the galaxy. In the complex skins of the energetic plasma of these suns, the Necrontyr found a sentience that was more ancient than any of the corporeal species in creation, including the Old Ones. Entities of pure energy that had spawned during the birth of the stars eons before. These entities had little conception of what the rest of the universe entailed when the Necrontyr first found them, feeding upon the solar flares and magnetic storms of these bloated red giants. Here was the weapon of the Necrontyr had long sought to bring about the downfall of the Old Ones. Beings they believed were progeny of the death god they worshipped. Howsoever first contact occurred, the shadow of the Catan fell over the oldest Necrontyr dynasties first. The power of these starborn creatures was incredible. The raw energy of the stars made animate, and the Necrontyr called them Catan, or star gods, in their own tongue. The Catan were dispersed across areas larger than whole planets, their consciousnesses too vast for humanoids to comprehend. How the Necrontyr ever managed to communicate with them is unknown to the Adeptus Mechanicus. Understanding that such diffuse minds could never perceive the material universe without manifesting themselves in a material form, some Necrontyr actively sought the Catan's favor and oversaw the forging of physical shells for the Catan to occupy, cast from the living metal called necrodermis that they had once used for their colony torch ships. Fragmentary Eldar legends tell of translucent streamers of electromagnetic force shifting across space as the star vampires coiled into their new bodies in the physical realm across an incorporeal bridge of starlight. Thus clad, The Catan took the shapes of the Necrontier's half-forgotten gods, hiding their own desires beneath cloaks of obsequious subservience. Incomprehensible forces were compressed into the living metal of the necrodermis bodies, which the Necrontier had forged as the full power of the Catan had found form. As the Catan focused their consciousness and became ever more aware of their new mode of existence, they came to appreciate the pleasures available to beings of matter, and the other realities of corporeal life. They deliciously focused trickles of electromagnetic energy given off by the physical bodies of the Necrontier all about them, awakened a new hunger in the Catan, very unlike the one they had once sated using the nourishing but essentially tasteless energies of the stars. So it was that one of the Catan came before the Silent King Zarek, acting as forerunner to the coming of his brothers. Amongst its own kind, the Catan was known as the Deceiver, for it was willfully treacherous. Yet the Silent King knew not of the Catan's true nature, and instead granted the creature an audience. The Deceiver spoke of a war, fought long before the birth of the Necrontier, between the Catan and the Old Ones. It was a war, he said, that the Catan had lost. In the aftermath, and fearing the vengeance of the Old Ones, he and his brothers had hidden themselves away, hoping one day to find allies with whom they could finally bring the Old Ones to account. In return for this aid, the Deceiver assured he and his brothers would deliver everything that the Necrontier craved. Unity would be theirs once again, and the immortality that they had sought for so long would finally be within their grasp. No price would there be for these great gifts, the Deceiver insisted, for they were but boons to be bestowed upon valued allies. Thus did the Deceiver speak, and who can say how much of this tale was truth? It is doubtful whether even the Deceiver knew, for trickery had become so much a part of his existence that even he could no longer divine its root. Yet his words held sway over Zarek, who, like his ancestors before him, despaired of the divisions that were tearing his people apart. For long months he debated the matter with the other two pharaons of the Triarch, and the noblest of his royal court. Through it all, the only dissenting voice was that of Orican, the court astrologer, who foretold that the alliance between the Necrontier and the Catan would bring about a renaissance of glory, but destroy forever the soul of the Necrontier people. Yet desire and ambition swiftly overrode caution, and Orican's prophecy was dismissed. A Necrontier year after the Deceiver had presented his proposition, the Triarch agreed to the alliance, and so forever doomed their race. For their part, the Necrontiers soon fell into awe of their discoveries, and the Catan moved to take control over their benefactors. The powers of the Catan, manifested in the physical world, were indeed almost godlike, and it was not long before the Catan were being worshipped as the star gods the Necrontier had named them. Perhaps they had been tainted by the material universe they had become a part of, or perhaps this had always been their nature, even when they were bound to the suns they fed upon. But the Catan proved to be as cruel and capricious as the stars from which they had been born. They soon reveled in the worship of a Necrontier, and feasted upon the life energies of countless mortal slaves. So guys, this is where we're going to leave off for today. Tune in into our next lore video to hear more about the prehistory of the Warhammer 40k universe. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please comment what you want my further lore videos to be about. I would love to hear back from you guys regarding that. Have an awesome rest of your day, and remember, the Emperor protects.